Greetings and welcome to the Comics Coffee Metal Podcast. I'm your host, Don Cardenas, and today I have an amazing returning guest. Not only is he a incredibly talented artist who's worked for Marvel, DC, and AWA, he's also an incredible guitar player, and his legendary, or I don't know how you guys prefer to be called, legendary, historic, classic. I don't know anymore, but the Locked in a Vacancy, the hardcore band from New York, they're back with a new EP, and it's awesome. It sounds amazing, and I can't wait to talk more about the gear and all that. But first and foremost, let's welcome on the show Nelson Blake the second.
Thank you so
Welcome
much,
back.
John. I really appreciate it, man. Appreciate the intro. It's funny you say the legendary Locked in a Vacancy, right? So
Yeah.
my perspective on the band is still kind of like, well, no one knows us, no one's heard of us. Generally, that's true, but it's not always true. And when it's not true, it surprises me. So we were playing this show in Long Island, maybe 2 months ago now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the band, two bands before us. So like, when we have shows, the bands before will thank all of the bands who performed and set everybody up for the bands coming in. And this band, who's actually a really good band, the name escapes me, but it's not because I didn't like the band, but it's a name that's hard to remember. It's like the Left Behind or something like that. I'll try to find the name of that at some point and tweet it out. But they were a good band, and the most similar to us actually in the style and like in the approach. And he said the legendary Locked in the Vacancy, and the crowd did this like big crazy cheer, and I was like, I've never heard that before. I guess that's what happens when
Legendary.
you're around forever. But and that show actually turned out to be a Locked in a Vacancy show. We were playing with a bunch of other really good bands. I think actually everybody played really well that night. But I thought the headliners were going to be the big draw, but it actually turned out to be us. And that felt really good, I have to say. When that happens, it's not all the time because we're not, Metallica. But when it does happen, it is
Hey,
quite nice.
hey, people were clearly pumped that you guys were back because
Yeah.
looking back, the history of you guys being together and you being in the band, it's a little start and stop, you would say.
Yes.
But you guys definitely made an impression because people seem to be really excited because whenever you know share a post or something about the any of the stuff you guys are doing right now, I see people's response to it, and there's just Googling the band, looking around, to get some info and just familiarize myself a bit more with them. I see how much people like are stoked you guys are back. you
Thank you,
guys
man.
you
I
guys got this
appreciate that.
EP. There's lots of comments on the metal websites, which can be a little hairy sometimes, but
Yeah.
for you guys, it seems to be, from what I've seen, just generally just really positive, and that's awesome because I'm not typically, I don't lean towards the hardcore part of metal.
Hmm.
I'm starting to get there though.
Yeah.
Um, awesome person and writer Marc Bouchard. They are really into hardcore and stuff, and they suggested a few bands to me, and it
Hmm.
worked. They
Yeah.
were just thrashy enough, where I'm like, okay, I can get into the thrash veil of the hardcore part.
Right.
And then I believe you tagged me in one of the songs you guys put out. You think because you're like, this might be your cup of tea or something like that, I think,
Hmm.
and it was.
Awesome.
It certainly was. There's I believe it was the let me double check the title here because I had it up here before of Church and State. Yeah, because you have
Yeah.
that breakdown part, and I'm like, that's my bread and butter section right
Yeah.
there.
So it's funny
That's my
because
riff.
like the Locked in the Vacancy, the way we came up, it first started not even as a hardcore band. It started as an indie rock band. And if you look at the
Oh.
name, which comes from John Hughes' movie The Breakfast Club, right? So Judd Nelson
Hmm.
says something like, I guess nothing to do when you're locked in a vacancy, something like that, right?
Hmm.
So that is a indie rock kind of band name. It's not like the most
Yeah.
metal band name in the world.
Hmm.
And so Hector Rodriguez, who started the band, he was really into like sunny day real estate and that kind of stuff. And so it really good melodic stuff. But then he started to get more into the New York City hardcore scene. And
Hmm.
so bands like Shutdown, Indecision, Fahrenheit, like all of those bands were really popping at the time. And Locked in a Vacancy started getting more aggressive. And in that period, that's when they were like a hardcore band. But by the time I joined, we were quickly transferring over to be more of a metal band. But what
Yeah.
happened was a lot of bands were doing that because all of the Swedish stuff was coming in. So like In Flames and At the Gates and
Hmm.
Meshuggah, all of that stuff was coming over. One of my favorite bands, I have to mention Arch Enemy. Can't go without mentioning Arch Enemy.
Oh, yeah, yeah, they're great.
Absolutely great, right? And so we were listening to that stuff religiously, and I was never a hardcore guy, right? Like, so I went to those
Yeah.
shows. What I loved about the shows was the energy. All of the drummers are usually fantastic, so that part was entertaining. But I wasn't into like the screaming, and there's like
Hmm.
a, how do you say, like a looseness to hardcore that I personally wasn't into. Like, there's a lot more noise and stuff like that. And I told the band when I
Yeah.
joined, I'm a metal guy, you know? So I'll fit in as much as I can, but that's where I'm coming from. So I can learn your songs and play them, but when we start writing new stuff, I'm really going to be writing mostly metal because my influences are Pantera and the Ninja Gaiden soundtrack, right? So, but it was like coincidentally that was happening to a lot of bands in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Long Island, Boston area. And this is where metalcore came from. And there's a lot less hardcore in metalcore. The two things that really stayed are the screaming, that style of
Hmm.
vocals, and the breakdowns.
Yeah.
And the breakdowns in metalcore and metalcore influenced metal, because now they're kind of all over the place. They're in deathcore and all
Hmm.
that other stuff, right? Um, those breakdowns came from really more the sing-alongs from like hardcore. And there was a band called Candiria that had these really tight off time style breakdowns.
Hmm.
And then Meshuggah, which was like break down the band. They're like the Neptunes of metal to
Yeah.
me, where they just like took the dance part and made the whole album that. So
Yeah.
at least before they changed, it got more like droney and stuff like that. But back in the day, they were like thrash metal, breakdown, 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 saxophone style solo, breakdown, breakdown. At least that's how we heard it back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was how it all turned into that. So it's funny because from the outside looking in, our origins are as a New York City hardcore band. But from the inside looking out, we're the metal band in this scene. You know what I mean? Which is kind of
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, and that's probably why I'm quickly taking to your guys' music, that
Yeah.
will include mainly with the stuff you've contributed to writing to, because that's my the metal in. I think we have a lot of the same touchstone bands,
Yeah.
like Pantera and stuff like that, where I can hear that influence in, and I think that's kind of where my more bands like that, I think it'll get me into that, because I do, it's not that I'm against like screaming all the time, of course not. That's
Hmm.
I really, 10 years ago, yeah, I would have said no thank you. But you know maybe, well, I guess it's been more than 10 years, geez. But in the early 2000s, I would have been like,
Yeah.
no, no thanks, it's not my thing. Pantera is the screamiest I get, or Static X, and they were screaming in key. So
Right. Right.
that's the extent of where I went. But I've really just been all over the place now, because one of my favorite bands right now is Orbit Culture, and
Hmm.
their gutturals are just sickeningly low. But they
Yeah.
also have that contrast with, the very James Hetfield and Justice for All era kind of singing snarl kind of thing happening. So there is that uh, that diversity within their sound and the dynamics and stuff like that. And I'm finding in a lot more of these hardcore ish or crossover, whatever we want to call it. It's
Yeah.
it's it's you know, and that's a separate thing. But so many people like, what subgenre of metal is this band? And it's going to be, you ask five people, they're going to give you five different answers.
It's worse now because
Yeah,
when
it
we
is.
came up, there was like, it was always kind of silly. For
Hmm.
me, it was always kind of silly to call metal anything other than metal. I felt
Yeah.
like, especially for like true metal, not and I
Hmm.
will, and I'm already doing it, but I would separate the metal that's much closer to hard rock, right? So like Scorpions and White Snake and Rat and that stuff, because it's
Yeah.
trying to do something different, right? Like their
Hmm.
music was partially made for, you know, really date music almost and party music
Yeah.
in a very, you know, almost really in the same lane that hip hop and rock and roll have been at times. We're going to get drunk and we're going to go to a party. We're going to get girls. We're going to go
Hmm.
home and have sex. This party, that kind of thing. Metal has never really been a part of that en masse, right? So when you look at
Yeah.
Metallica, Megadeth, Pantera, Death, you know, Cannibal
Hmm.
Corpse, Slayer, you go through all the bands that are like considered metal bands, they all come more from a place of here's kick your ass music with a kick your ass message kind of thing. Whether it's something sillier like blah blah blood and guts, or something more personal like this is my life story, or something more political like government stuff, Rage Against the Machine. I would, even though Rage
Yeah.
Against the Machine has a hip hop metal sound, to me they're more just a metal band, and really kind of the
Yeah.
beginning of the metalcore stuff because they had the breakdowns and all of that stuff kind of first in the way that they were doing it. Um, but that spirit, I think, is what makes the genre. And that
Hmm.
spirit, to me, encompasses basically everybody in metal for the most part. Um,
Yeah.
you know, even power metal, talking about dragons and stuff.
Hmm.
From a musical perspective, I look at metal, when you look at like metal rhythms, to me, there's the heartbeat, there's the stomp, there's the getting on your horse and chase and, you know, charging into
Yeah.
battle. These are like the general beats. There's the
Yeah.
escalated heartbeat, like the anxiety attack heartbeat, right? There's the slow about
Yeah.
to die one. All of these things, if you just take them, apply them to bass drums, you're like, oh, I know that song. I know that
Yeah.
genre. You know what I mean? And so for me, it's always been, I just call it metal, right? And that means
Hmm.
everything. And I like most of it. Like the only genre of metal that I personally don't listen to at all really is new metal.
Hmm.
But outside of new metal, pretty much everything else I have at least a little bit of space for. But
Yeah.
now I think, see, back when I came up, because there was no internet, or it just started when I, like, you know, when I
Yeah.
was in my
Yeah.
teens. It was still from the tradition of this is what New York metal sounds like, and they only know each other. This is what Midwestern metal
Yeah.
sounds like in California, and they only know each other. And then when they meet each other and play on the same show, there's this kind of culture clash that happens.
Yeah.
Whereas now, everybody listens to everything on their devices, and
Yeah.
your playlist just has the songs you like. So if the
Hmm.
songs you like are Kill Switch, and then, you know, Pantera, and then Lorna Shore, and then Whitechapel, and then, you know what I'm saying, and on and on.
Yeah.
To you, you're just vibing, and that didn't really
Hmm.
happen before. We came from the culture. It was like how my dad listened to music. You'd put on one album and you'd listen to the whole
Hmm.
thing all the way through. So the bands had more of like a presence, even in like the listening
Yeah.
habits. Whereas now, you know, every band gets like one or two songs on your playlist, and then you keep it
Yeah.
moving for most people.
Yeah. No, yeah, I'm definitely the same generation there. Like, um, my older brother is really into compute. He's an IT guy, and he was really into computers at the time, and the company he's working for. So he got us into CD burning pretty fast
Yeah,
after it came out. So like, but I no, I remember the days like you were looking for a band. You have to go to the record store,
right,
hope hope that their CD is the one that's on the headphones you can listen to
right.
see if you like more than that one song you like, to see if it's worth spending the 12.99, 19.99, whatever it was at the time, to get the CD. Because I can't tell you how many times I've bought a CD, or you did what I did in the beginning. You play the Columbia House mail order game,
Hmm.
and you scam them. You end up, I think I ended up having like over 100 CDs. I only paid for like one full price.
Yeah,
The rest were a cent. But you know, but yeah, that's what you had, what you had, and you had what was around you. Now you can listen to everything anywhere, anytime you want. And I do think that's a huge fact. Like, as awesome as that is, it gives everybody so much option paralysis when you're trying to like find something. And I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it. Doing this show where I'm trying to find more music to recommend to people. If I didn't do that, I would be stuck listening to the same things over and over
same
again.
thing. Yes. Yeah.
I would never have found bands I love, in this by doing that. And, you know, if, and I also think that's kind of like the impetus why a lot of people these days are going back to buying records and going back to buying
Hmm.
tapes and things like that.
Yeah.
Because, we want to make the decision, I'm going to put this on to listen to this album, and that's definitely something, one of my own personal goals for 2024 is to just make a decision to put on more music and listen to it just all the way through. Don't make, a Metallica playlist. Don't make a thrash playlist. Don't make a
Right.
whatever playlist. Just pick an album, listen to it, and be done.
I think it's a
And have that
little less
experience.
about the playlists themselves as
Yeah,
how the playlist serves our listening habits now. Rick
yeah,
Beato, YouTuber, talked about this where he said when he came up, music was its own activity. You put on the record and you listen to it,
hmm,
and that's what you were doing. But now, music is something you listen to while you do something else, right?
yeah,
So people put on music and play a video game or listen to, maybe a podcast in the background while the music's turned
hmm,
down low or whatever they're doing. But they're playing music while they're in the shower. It's music is like the soundtrack to your life now. And I
hmm,
think, and what's great about this podcast is what we have to make sure we do is it's okay for culture to shift and change. That happens literally all the time, right? The only thing that doesn't change is that, everything always changes. But we have to be caretakers of the good of the past. And I think the two things from the past that I really hope the younger generations don't miss out on, and we have a responsibility to like try not to sound like boomers when we help them out here. Deep listening is very valuable, not just to musicians, but just to human beings. Listen to
yeah,
take time out occasionally, just take a walk, put on music, not a podcast, and really, really listen to it. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, life changing exercise. And you can tell by all of the great music that has come from that when the
yeah,
great music of the past has such disadvantages compared to now. I want to know how to do something on guitar, YouTube, how do I do it? And if somebody has the best way to teach it ever,
yeah,
and I can learn it, and I don't think there's a single guitar technique that you can't get now in the matter of 1 to maximum 6 months. And when I say 6 months, I'm talking about the very, very hardest things in the world. I think most things,
yeah,
go to YouTube, practice it for a month, and you'll have it. Whereas back in the day, that stuff used to be magic. But the reason the
yeah,
music from the past was so great is because of their deep listening habits, number one, and number two, socializing around the music in a healthy way.
yeah.
I learned about Death and Cynic and Mr. Bungle from a guy named Mike Turney. He was actually the guy who played Danny in the Ninja Turtles movie. Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah, he actually is a comic book artist, or he was back in the day. He tried out for Top Cow way back when, and wound up working at the animation job that I started out in. But I knew Mike
Oh, okay.
before that. So Mike, I think I met him at conventions or something. Back when you had to take your portfolio and get cut up by
Yeah,
comic book artists in the portfolio line at shows. And so Mike showed me those bands, just hanging out and being like, check these guys, check those guys. Don't just listen to Pantera and Dream Theater all day. And I'm like,
yeah,
thanks, Mike. Thanks for showing this to me. I didn't find out that stuff because it was just on a random playlist or something. And so I think
yeah.
preserving that element of it will help people avoid the pitfalls of short attention span style songs.
Hmm. Yeah, which, the whole, TikTok thing where,
Yeah.
it's everything is built around that. And my wife and I are actually talking about this the other day where, you know, she would hear, well, we're older. So I see all I see all the popular TikToks on Instagram and she sees them on YouTube a week later. Because we
Yeah.
don't have TikTok,
Yeah, me
but
neither.
she's like, I'll hear a big clip of a song. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a good song. And I'll go listen to the whole song. It's like, well, this is kind of it, isn't it? And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's a big problem actually. A lot of people are, trying to rally against like this writing songs for TikTok thing. But to go back to what you're saying, music of the old days and stuff like that, I think what's missing is our feeling of having discovered something, a feeling of searching for something and having that discovery, and it kind of ties into comics as well, because back in our day, if you wanted to know what the hell happened 10 issues prior, or you saw that little editor's note blurb box on a comic book you were reading, you had to find issue 146 to see why J. Jonah Jameson's in space fighting a
Right.
Martian or something. Like you need to, like you would want to go find that issue, dig, and have that sense of discovery and have that kind of, I guess that general dopamine hit
Hmm.
of like reward for it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that in a bad way at all either, because um, the instant gratification thing, which is a huge problem in our society to begin with, and we're all guilty of it. Um, but there is that, like you said, with the YouTube, you want to learn something on guitar. I have long been trying to like get better at guitar for the past few years, and I make this super long save playlist on YouTube. Like I'm gonna go do these techniques, I'm gonna do this practicing, but what ends up happening is I just end up ignoring that. And then when I'm writing something or I'm trying to finish something, and I'm like, I really want a part like this. I just look up how to do that part. What's that
Right.
technique? And then, I just really try to nail it down for a little bit, and then I'm done.
Hmm.
But it's also like easy in, easy out.
Yeah.
So that when I try to come back to it, it's not there. I didn't do the work to discover it and have it ingrained in me and all these things. And sitting and listening to music and giving music that time, that is definitely something, that this generation, I think, I see a lot of people wanting to do that, or, younger kids, younger people, like really investing in the records or having, nice audio setups and getting, all these,
Hmm.
basically making it a point that music is important, even if you are doing something else, but just having music playing and not, it being the audio thing you're engaging with is, already something that's like, uh, uh, a few steps in the right direction than where we are now. Because like you said, there's been plenty of times where like I'll have music on or something, and then the TV's on or something, or a YouTube thing is playing, and it's just like, there's just too much, and we're just overstimulated,
Yes.
oversaturated, and everything's just available too easily for us. And or if you're, prime example is I was listening to an album the other day, and I'm like, wow, this part kind of sounds like that one band. So instead of finishing the song and all that,
You
I stopped
stop.
what I was doing and
Right.
I looked up that one band just to make sure that's what that sounds like, that right. And it was, close enough, but it was like, why did I need to do that? I didn't need to do that. Obviously
Well,
my brain's
this.
wired a certain way that
Well,
make me
well,
do
no,
that,
but
but
you're
like,
right though. That instinct is is the discovery instinct, but it's not trained for the internet age. We're not
yeah,
trained to have all of the questions that the mind can think up at a whim answered
yeah,
at a whim. That we're not trained to filter it, right?
no,
So the answer is honestly, it's just deep work, right? It's just
yeah,
deep listening. If you're drawing, deep drawing. If you're reading, deep reading. Don't read with a TV on in the background and that kind of stuff, because the danger of that is it's whittling down your ability to focus, your ability to your attention span. It's chopping away at it by getting you in these short loops, really these kind of TikTok style loops of attention. And that's actually a genuine danger. It's not that that stuff is inherently bad, but what it is, it's inherently bad to get stuck in that loop, right?
yeah,
If once you lose power over it, and we all have, like collectively, I'm not saying this from the
yeah,
mountaintop of Mr. Perfect Focus, I assure you, but specifically say when it comes to guitar, I was able to avoid the pitfall because in guitar, I worked with Al Joseph a little bit. Al Joseph is a YouTube guitar player. Highly recommend him. If you want to take lessons from somebody, especially if you're a metal player, I recommend Al. And basically, the method that Al teaches requires a level of deep work. You can, once you know what you're doing, put on, he even suggests this, put on a movie, put on anime, and just get through the reps or something. But
hmm,
before you do that, there's a step in there that kind of adds a security measure that you're not doing it the wrong way. And the wrong way, really, to do anything is to not be fully engaged. Because when you're not
Yeah.
fully engaged, you're not absorbing all of the information that you could absorb. Like a lot of times when we absorb information, we only think of what we consciously absorb. But your subconscious is so ridiculously powerful and it
Hmm.
helps you. And another guitar teacher, Tom Hess, like what he teaches is basically you don't have to practice for hours and hours and hours. What you have to do is you have to allow your subconscious to work for you, right? So practice in these short bursts, but in between the short bursts, your subconscious will take what you did and go, okay, let me download that and put that into my programming. And then when you go back to like the fifth, 10th time doing it, even though if you timed yourself, you only actually practiced
Yeah.
for like 20 minutes. But because that 20 minutes was broken up into 1 to 3 minute bursts of full focus and then subconscious work on top of it, you actually get a lot of progress done. And so I think
Yeah.
that's the thing. And this is, and going back to the music listening, it's the same thing. It's not that you can never listen to music in the shower while playing video games or doing something else. Also do that. It's not that you can never be on TikTok. Also do that. But at the same time, if you want to watch a 3 hour long movie and you can't watch that movie without feeling like you have to check your phone, now you have some, repair work to do.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And like you said, like the focus practice, like that again is, it's one of my music goals of this year is having just telling myself like 20 minutes. And I have all these things lined up, and I'm going to be starting it next week, where it's just like for a couple times a week, just hard
Yeah.
focus on that, and just move on that. And so yeah, I'm 100% with you. It's just, again, I'm far from perfect on getting down the rabbit holes or having the distractions or using music as the distraction. um but yeah, it's just something like, listening to music is great when you're doing stuff. Of
Yeah.
course it is. But I think, as you're trying to say, is we want to give music a chance to have a deeper experience with us and give it a space of its own.
Especially if
Again,
you're writing music. Because the stuff
yeah,
that you
yeah,
write is really what you emotionally reacted to when you were
yeah,
listening, kind of chopped up and reconfigured through your personality filter. But if you
yeah.
never deeply react emotionally to music, you're going to have a more empty library of stuff,
Hmm.
of material to work from. But when
Yeah,
it comes to the practicing, let me tell you, dude, I did that. So for, I don't know, maybe 20 years, I played guitar roughly the same way I did from about year 5 of playing guitar. So my first year playing guitar was like anybody else's, try to learn some songs from really terrible tablature, blah, blah, blah.
hmm.
The difference was I absolutely fell in love with guitar and went maniacal from about month number maybe 3 to month number 18. And that's when I joined Locked in a Vacancy, was around that time. And basically, I took on the athletic challenge of playing Master of Puppets and wanted to play it perfectly. I wanted to play it super duper tight, especially the rhythm part, because it was such an endurance
Yeah.
test, right?
Oh
Especially if
yeah.
you've never played anything like that before. So my down picking got really, really tight, right? So even though I didn't know anything about guitar, the only thing I knew was the E minor scale. I couldn't have told you how to build a chord. I couldn't play Kumbaya. I literally could only play metal songs and Locked in a Vacancy songs, right? Couldn't play Guns N'
Yeah.
Roses or anything like that. No blues, no nothing. So being in Locked in a Vacancy and writing songs, I got to an advanced level of that. And my ear developed because I didn't have an ear. But once my ear developed, I was exactly the same way for like, I would say from the year 2001 to the year 2018, maybe. And in 2018, I got the curiosity to learn music theory because I'm drawing a lot of comics and I have YouTube playing in the background.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, I'll just throw in some music theory stuff. Maybe I'll pick something up. And then a certain question hit me. It was one question. It was, how do you find the chords in a scale? Because I'm tired of being terrible at chords. right? Because I
Hmm.
wasn't good at chord progressions at all. And when I say not good, I couldn't do them. I could come up with something by ear, but I didn't know what I was doing. So I found, a video that described that, but there was one. It was, I think, a Ben Eller video where he broke it down.
Oh, yeah, Ben's
Um,
great.
yeah. Although I think that particular video, there's a better way to do that that I won't get into
Hmm.
right now, but maybe I'll tell you
Okay.
after the podcast. But but it did help me. It was the beginning, and so there was one chord where he said, "We'll address this later," and it was the diminished chord, right? So it was basically, if you're in the major scale, it's major, minor, minor, major, major, diminished. And I was like, well, what is that? What's a diminished chord? And then I found out what that was, and um, I played it, and I was like, well, what's the purpose of that? Like that was the main thing for me, is like, what's the purpose of this nasty sounding chord? And I found out the purpose of the diminished chord, or not the purpose of it, but the way you can use it is to resolve it, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, resolution, that's interesting. Okay, tension, resolution. Ooh, this is starting to make sense with like what I know about storytelling, right? And comic book
Hmm.
stuff. Tension, resolution, that's basically the whole game. So that was the bug in my ear that drove me to be like, okay, I got the concept of music theory now. It's basically tension, resolution, and understanding intervals. Not a great
Hmm.
summary, but good enough, right? So then I was like, okay, now that I know this, I need a way to practice this so that I can like get good at all the stuff I can't do. That's when I took the lesson from Al Joseph. I really only took one lesson from Al, but it was such a good lesson. But what he does is he does something called the cycling method. Have you ever heard of it?
It sounds familiar.
Okay. Long story short, the way a lot of people teach you to get faster is to practice slowly and then build up. There's a lot of reasons this isn't the greatest thing. It's not a terrible practice, but it has many, many deep flaws, and it's very much something from the past. The cycling method is you put on a drum beat, whatever, the speed doesn't matter, right? But let's just say, for the
Hmm.
sake of conversation, 100 beats per minute, right? Like a good mid tempo metal song drum beat. So you practice whatever you're practicing. It doesn't matter what. It could be a chord progression, it could be a scale fragment, whatever it is, arpeggio. They're all going to
Yeah.
fall into this practice style, right? But you start it at quarter notes, then you go to triplets, then you go to eighth notes, then you go to eighth note triplets, then you go to 16th notes, 16th note triplets, and if you can, 30-second notes, right? And then you go back down. And you do it basically, I mean, it doesn't matter how long you do it, but 2 measures a piece is recommended. So 2 measures quarter notes, 2 measures triplets, blah, 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 blah. And you go all the way up and go back down. So, and there's a point to this. So, besides just a guitar lesson,
Hmm.
the thing was, it makes everything you play musical, because you
Mm.
stop thinking in terms of fast and slow, and you start
Yeah.
thinking in terms of subdivisions. But then a tricky thing happens, because not only are you working on speed and skill and form, but you can change little things at the lower speeds that you could also change at the higher speeds, but it's different. You can change emphasis. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So instead of like dun 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 dun, dun you can go dun 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 dun
Hmm.
dun dun dun, and it changed. And the thing is, now you're actually interacting with it. You're not just turning your robot hand on, turning the robot metronome on, and going back and forth until you hit an arbitrary number that makes you feel good about being fast. You're always being a musician. And that concept of always being a musician, no matter what you're playing, no matter what speed you're playing, no matter what scale, chord, style of music, that made guitar conscious for me. And that got me out of the trap of picking up the guitar and feeling like my fingers always wanted to play the same thing. Then I felt like I switched over from really having an amateurish sound when I picked up the guitar, even though I could record professionally. I felt like an amateur if I was just messing around, to being more
Hmm.
like the guys you see in like gear demo videos, where they just seem like they're making up music the entire time. That was
Hmm.
what switched me over, but it goes to the same concept of being present and doing deep work and deeply interacting with what you're working on, not just autopiloting everything unconsciously.
yeah, that I'm gonna have to definitely look into that because I kind of feel like I'm where you were at in 2018, in that I'm ready to put in some deep work into getting better. I was recently listening to some songs I recorded around 2020, 2019, and um there's like I was like doing some solo stuff and stuff, like actual solos, and I'm like, wait, I played that? Because I feel like
Yeah.
I couldn't play that now. I'm like,
Right.
and I obviously, if I think about it, I'm like, well, yeah, back then I was definitely playing a lot more guitar back then. I've only really been playing my guitar, playing guitar for like, I've had one for a very long time, but I didn't really like start digging into it until probably 2014, into
Hmm.
2014, 2015. And that's when I really kind of like, because I was primarily, I still kind of mentally feel like I'm a bass player because
Yeah.
that's where I started, that's where I go, and but the funny thing is, I was like, I was never wanting, in terms of bass, I never wanted to be Cliff Burton.
Yeah.
I wanted to be Jason Newsted. I wanted to be that
Hmm.
guy who's just beating the hell out of the thing. I wanted to be Doug Pinnick. I didn't want to
Yeah.
be shredding on the thing like
Yeah.
uh, you know, insert virtuoso bass player that I know all their names. I can't think. James Lomenzo. Okay,
Hmm.
like I don't want to be fucking James Lomenzo. Keeping up with Zach Wild shredding on his bass.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be the dude, laying the groove and doing, and just sounding heavy as shit. So when it came to guitar, like that's kind of where I started at. Like I just wanted to make the heavy riff, the heavy thing,
Yeah.
and then thanks to technology, super easy to just like write things now. And I have Easy Drummer 3 with these amazing sounding drum samples, and
Hmm.
I have all these MIDI grooves that I can just like pop on, and then if I write a riff to it or something like that, I can easily go and change it to make it sound more like something different as opposed to like a stock drum beat. And it's just super easy to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I really got into doing all that, and then somewhere along the line, I got pretty good at guitar, and then I got busy with comics, and then guitar kind of took a backseat, and I'm trying to like balance and find my balance now. So the cycling thing you mentioned, that's definitely sounds definitely in line with the way I think and the way I learn,
Yeah.
because I learn by doing, not by rote practice.
Right. And
You know,
so going with that, so my practice when I'm practicing normally, and right now I'm not practicing as normally because I have a minor finger inflammation that I'm
Oof.
waiting for it to go away so I don't make it worse and
Yeah,
can't play a show or something. But
yeah,
normally, it's now this might sound like a lot to some people, but it's basically a 45-minute minimum.
hmm,
Now, you don't have to do a 45-minute minimum. There's a reason I do a 45-minute minimum. And it's because if I do 45 minutes, that's 15 minutes of legato, 15 minutes of alternate picking, and 15 minutes of arpeggio work. And because I'm in a metal band, I have to stay athletic. So this
yeah,
ensures that the songs are easy for me to play on stage. Because you never ever want what you're doing on stage to be the limit of what you can do. You want to always be a good step ahead. You want to be 5 to 10 BPMs
yeah,
ahead of what you're playing at all times, right? So you
yeah,
can adjust. So when the drummer speeds up, you can keep up with him
yeah,
without
yeah,
without
exactly.
your hand cramping up or something, which should never happen anyway. But that ensures that I get all the work in. And really, the arpeggio work with the cycling method isn't the same thing as just going up and down with sweeps. Because what you
Hmm.
do is you're actually learning music theory when you do that. I mean, you can do this with the alternate picking and the legato work as
Yeah,
well. Once you're simultaneously learning music theory and athletic playing, you're never just an empty headed shredder. You're
yeah,
always improving your knowledge of, okay, this is the, if you're in a minor scale, this is the five, the six, and the seven. Okay, cool. That's what this fragment is. And then you make a little chord recording and you do those same practices on top of the chord recording. Not even disrupt, not even adding minutes to what you're doing. But now you're going, okay, this is what that interval sounds like on top of that. And because you're doing the cycling method and playing slow, you understand it melodically with like slower passages, but you also understand what it's like when you go over it quickly. And it's more of
hmm,
a passing note, right? Because if you play it
yeah,
slowly, it's a melodic note. If you play it very quickly, it's just a passing note and has a different effect. And So for me, that's why it's a 45-minute minimum. But I have had times where I had to reduce that to 5 minutes apiece, and it's 15
Hmm.
minutes of work. Same thing, legato, alternate picking, and arpeggio work, and it's still just as effective. It's just less actual work. You know what I mean? That's really
Yeah,
all it is. It's
yeah.
just less actual work. But I
I
still highly recommend it, even at that little bit. I would say 15 minutes though is the perfect amount of time. And if you wanted to go an extra 5 minutes, just do a quick 5 minute improv over the same chord progression for like a week. And you'll see that your knowledge of that chord progression and your ability to interact with it becomes much more musical and really where it's supposed to be, which is in touch with your emotions, not in touch with your fingers.
hmm Yeah, no, 100%. It's I think the term people like to use is like phrasing. Like it's the
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of learning how to do that. And looking back, that's kind of like how whenever I was constructing like a solo or something, that's very much how I would do it. Like I would just try to like you know I would slow the track down. I would like, what's the melody I want here, and how do I? So, and part of me wanting to just get better and know more, know just a bit more theory at the very least, is just so it doesn't take me so damn long to figure it.
Yeah, that's the thing about theory, right? Like, I'm almost mad at all of the people who described music theory to me coming up because they always described it as like this set of rules that the cool, smart kids know. And then the people who hated music theory are all like, oh, but then you lose your feel. And none of that, it has nothing to do with anything.
No.
It's like being an artist and learning how light works or learning how colors, actually, the closest is color theory, learning how
Yeah.
color interacts. It doesn't really change what you emotionally want to do. It just changes how much you know about it. So that
Mm.
something that you go, and there's still even moments of music theory where you can go, oh, I'm feeling something, and it doesn't make sense. I'm not analyzing it. But after you do it, you can go, oh, the reason that works is because I substituted the major chord for the minor chord right here. Or, oh, the
Yeah.
reason that works is because I did the secondary dominant. If you know that much about music theory, which I don't even think is necessary to like know that much. I think you
Yeah.
just need to know how intervals work and how to build a chord, and you're off to the races. Everything else is just words, basically. But
Hmm.
knowing how those interactions associate with your emotions, that's the point of music theory. And that's what does the most important thing for me, which is it takes the question marks off of the fretboard and out of the songs. So instead of you saying, oh, I like when that band does those kinds of parts, you're thinking, I love the way those guys use seconds in their chord
Yeah.
progressions. I love the way those guys apply suspended chords. You know what I mean? I
Hmm.
love the way Opeth uses the blues chord or and again, I don't think you need to know all of these terms, but if you're like, oh, I recognize that that's the Hungarian minor, you don't need to
Yeah.
know that, but you can say, what is that? Okay, like if you know how to build a chord, you can go, okay, so this is a harmonic minor scale with the second moved over here, or with the seventh moved over here, and then you look online and there'll be some name for it. You go, okay, cool. Now I know what other people call it, but music theory wise, you already knew which
Yeah.
notes were being shifted to create that sound. You know?
Hmm. Yeah. You made the comparison to the coloring, and immediately my thought was like it reminds me of learning perspective in comics,
Hmm.
because if you stay rigid to a perspective grid, 9 times out of 10, whatever background, whatever you're drawing, it's going to seem pretty stale and flat. There's certainly people who can be very uh, locked into the grid and make it seem lively and stuff like that. But for most artists, it's about learning. Okay, here's your perspective grid. Now you got to make through everything by not being so uh, slavish to the lines, the grid. You give it life. You kind of you twist this thing here, you move this thing here. Like if you're drawing like I was it's on my mind a lot too, because I've been laying out my next issue,
Yeah.
and I busted out some perspective grids for a couple establishing shots, and I'm like, I roughed in the basically the corners of the room and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, now there's a rug, and maybe shift the rug a little bit. There's a dresser here. Don't have it just have it shifted slightly, or just giving things life. And that's like with music, like you can have the theory, but if you're so stuck on like this has to go into this, has to go into this, has to go into this because they say those are the rules, then you're left with the the type of people who there's definitely people who love that kind of stuff. That's their bread and
Well,
butter. They love that. They love the the exactness of the
so
theory and stuff like that.
similar to the point you're making, right? I think this is the misconception that people have about principles. Principles are
Yeah.
not rules. And theory is not rules. It's just telling you what's happening. It's not telling you whether or not you should do it. And that's the big
Mm-hmm.
mistake people make. They'll go, so, and even people who are great at music theory will go, oh, I don't know if this makes sense. There's actually no such thing as not making sense. There's an explanation for it, no matter how it sounds, no matter how crazy or
Yeah.
weird it sounds. Music theory will just tell you what it is. That's all it's doing. Same thing with like perspective. The most problems that artists have with perspective when they have the rigid lines issue is that they don't take into account that our eyes are lenses. So there's
Mm-hmm.
distortion, and we don't see at 100 million frames per second. So we don't see everything as completely still frame by frame. If I was to swipe my hand back and forth, it turns into a blur. It turns into bending, right? And even physics doesn't work that way. You see those slow mo
Yeah.
things of them hitting the golf ball and it squishes up. So
Yeah.
you're not actually representing perspective the way humans experience it if you 100% stick to a grid, because the way we experience it in mediums is in film, it's with different focal lengths, and these
Mm-hmm.
different lenses create different levels of distortion or flattening or focus. So if you try to draw everything in perfect perspective and in perfect focus, you're drawing without thinking of lenses. And
Yeah.
so okay, so now what if you do think of lenses, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what lens should you use? That's up to you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with music theory. It's like just replace all of those words with things like chords and scales or whatever.
Yeah.
So okay, so this
Exactly.
is the key you're in. You're at this part of the song. Which chord should you use? The person who doesn't understand music theory is going to point to the chord that comes next in the song. But someone who really understands music theory and the point of music theory is going to say, no, play whatever chords you hear. Play what your heart says. And afterwards, music theory will tell you if that chord is diatonic to that key, if it's borrowed from the minor key, or if it's completely outside the key, but it works for you. The reason it's probably working for you is because of what would normally be there is here, and you're creating these tensions and you're resolving it over here. It could be a million reasons why that thing that's quote unquote not supposed to work works. But nothing's supposed to work. Everything that's supposed to work will eventually be generic and boring. You know, what's
Yeah.
supposed to work is that you feel something and you express it. There just happens to be a system of interaction and theory and terms that describes it. That if you learn that system, instead of having to wait for inspiration to hit for you to do something special, if you know how you feel, you can say, here's the theory that most relates to how I feel, and I can start there, as opposed
Yeah.
to staring at a blank page or a blank sound file and going, I don't want to create something generic, but I don't know what I want to do. I guess I'll not create anything. Whereas with music theory, or the same thing with art, you can say, if you're doing the perspective example, like you said, oh, I'll try this with a wide angle feel. Oh, I'll try it with a telephoto feel. Oh, I'll try it, say, if I'm using special effects where the background is wide angle, but the character is in more of a telephoto. You know what I'm saying? Like in a shorter lens.
Mm-hmm.
So, and say you're, Rob Liefeld and you're just, flying by the seat of your pants. Somebody else who understands those things can come along and go, well, the reason this works here and not over here is because here he instinctively did something that works. And then here he was going for the same thing, but since he didn't know, and I don't want to pick on Rob, but anybody really,
No.
since he didn't know what he was doing,
Yeah.
it didn't work as well over here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's spot on. And yeah, not picking on Rob. He's just, one, popular enough for everyone to know what you're talking about. Because there's definitely stuff he's done in the past where it's like, that's actually really cool and really, and probably, was something a lot of other artists were like, oh, I'm gonna do my version of this or that. And there's other things where, so on and so forth. Like one of the, not to go off too much of a tangent, but like there's that legendary issue of X Force that Mike Mignola,
Yeah.
went over off his layouts. And, I love Mike Mignola's work, but if Mike Mignola had done that from start to finish, I don't think that issue would have been
Oh, no, no, no.
as good.
Yeah.
He the funniest thing was, I just read the article the other day. Someone shared it where Mike told Rob, like, I don't do top down shots or whatever. So you could see in the layouts whenever Rob had like the top down shot or whatever, he would just make it
Yeah.
a mid
Yeah.
shot or something. But it worked because it was Mike Mignola. But there's enough of that, just the fly by the seat of the pants that Liefeld does, that because to me, Mike Mignola, legend, amazing, but everything he does to me seems very measured. It seems very like he's thought this through. Everything has a
Right.
point. So having that kind of mixture there
Right.
really works. But that's a tangent off
It's a
of what
great
we're saying.
tangent though, right? Because if you look at it, Mike and Rob come from a different emotional place, and
Yeah.
they're looking to give a different emotional experience. And even though, because Mike is more measured, he's going to have more successes. But according to
Mm-hmm.
even his own standard, he doesn't always have the same level of success. It just so happens that you can say, well, according to these storytelling rules, he has more success because he never gets to a place of it not working, right? Whereas with Rob, because he's less measured and is less aware of the quote unquote rules, he's going to have less success in terms of it falling apart. But even him, he's never going to have the same amount of success according to his own rules. None
Mm-hmm.
of us are, you know? So
Yeah.
that's not really a standard anybody should aspire to. Like some days you're going to, I don't want to say some days you're going to have it, some days you're going to not. You get good enough, everything's going to at least be solid. But
Yeah.
that's not the measure of how quote unquote good you are or how successful you are. What it is does that represent the feelings you were trying to convey? Did that tell the story you were trying to tell?
Yeah.
Because someone coming along and again making the same musical comparison, someone coming along and making it more correct, they've literally done tests on that where they take some old record that was like
Mm-hmm.
recorded in some janky way or by a sloppy guitarist and they bring in like a better guitarist to play it better, and it's worse because
Yeah.
sloppiness is a part of the human experience, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you now listen, if you can't help but be sloppy, maybe work more. But
Yeah.
if the thing that you're making, and this was what was so great about X Force and Deadpool and New Mutants and all of the stuff Rob did in the early going, that was in the spirit of what he was trying to do. That's not better if, and you know, I've worked with Marc Silvestri for years. That's not better if Mark does it. You know, and from a draftsmanship standpoint, Mark and Rob are in two completely different categories. This is in terms of
Yeah.
ability. But
Yeah.
in terms of emotional feel, I don't know if anybody could have ever done X Force and New Mutants better than what Rob did because he was just really in touch with what he was trying to do at that time. The same way Joe
Yeah.
Madureira was in like early Battle Chasers and you know like these kind of classic books where like especially early Hellboy and I think Conqueror Worm Hellboy, like
Mm-hmm.
Mike was just on his stuff on that. You know what I mean? Like he was just there.
Mm-hmm.
Certain Jason Pearson body bag stuff. He's just locked in.
You know,
And what's the
I
common
yeah.
denominator? It's being locked in, you know, being locked into
Yeah.
those emotions and
Yeah.
translating that.
Yeah. I wonder, how much of it is also feeling like you got something to prove. Like you have
That
that
varies.
you have
That varies.
you have that kind of like feeling behind it because you mentioned Marc Silvestri, and I can't recall a single interview with any of the other image guys that they didn't all like agree that no, Mark's the best of us. Like
Yeah,
like
yeah.
hands down, he's the best. And I tend to Mark's my guy. That was my
Hmm.
guy for the image stuff and all that. And I'm just kind of thinking about like when he came out with Cyberforce and all that, and codename Strike Force and all that, and then he just like changed up his style. Like at that point in his career, just like, I'm gonna get scratchier. I'm gonna get and then the Darkness came out, and
Hmm.
he's kind of been in that mode for ever since then, and just kind of like, I feel like that was kind of him trying to not trying to him deciding like, and this is me speculating wildly, obviously, because there's been a lot of, I've done more than my fair share of watching image documentaries.
Yeah.
That was my time, coming up and reading comics. That he was kind of, it sounded like he was kind of done with comics at that point. But then the image guy said, "Hey, you want to do this?" And he's like, "I guess, okay." Like I was on X-Men, now I'm on Wolverine, and that's fine. But like, what else am I going to do at this point? So I kind of feel like, with the Darkness, him shifting it up was kind of him, kind of rediscovering like, oh no, wait, I still got like, something to really say here and something to like do with my art. That
So
not cause I love the Cyberforce stuff. Don't get me wrong at all, but like, I feel like that because that shows this is not a drastic shift in his art, but it definitely felt like he had a purpose
so I'll
for
say
having
about
that
all of the
shift.
image stuff, it's very hard to judge it from the outside because
Yeah.
keep in mind those guys were all kind of together, and
Hmm.
everybody, I can't overly snitch here, but everybody didn't 100% do everything. I don't think at any phase, right? So
Hmm.
nothing was 100% Jim Lee and Scott Williams or 100% Marc
Yeah.
Silvestri and Scott Williams. Like there's a whole studio and different
Oh
things
yeah.
changing hands at different times. And keep in mind, they made so much money at that time that they were doing other things besides drawing comics, right?
Yeah.
So so from the outside in, I think it's difficult to look at the finished product and say this person was doing this and doing that because the the process matters, right? And the process of him drawing Wolverine was him being at home and throwing pages into a FedEx box and sending it to
Hmm.
Marvel. And the process of him drawing Cyberforce was him being in California with like several other of the image guys, um, getting books out while making a whole lot of money. And it's just a completely different
Yeah.
thing. But I can speak a little bit to Mark's mentality when it comes to his work. And the thing that most people don't know about Mark is that Mark is a designer through and through. When I say he's a designer through and through, I mean that from a technical standpoint. He
Hmm.
doesn't draw the images you see, he sculpts them. And he starts
Hmm.
from a scribble and he shapes the scribble and he erases and he moves things around. So if you see black and whites of Marc Silvestri, the individual little scratchiness that you see that inkers always come and they do their best, but it's just not the same.
Yeah.
Um, it's all perfectly placed to
Hmm.
move the eye, to move the emotions around the piece. And I hate even saying this because when I wasn't there, it sounded like nonsense to me. But having seen it happen and actually learning a version of that for myself, transformed my approach to art totally. Seeing him and specifically my brother Mike Broussard, who I didn't understand what the hell Mark was doing when I saw him doing it. I was like, what is even going on? I don't know how to learn from this. We're just too different. But then I saw Mike do it and I was like, oh, I get it. And that made me study it. And honestly, it's probably my favorite part of drawing, which is why I can understand how Mark fell in love with it. So, what Mark fell in love with is not necessarily the kind of thing that translates as well to a sequential comic. But at the same time, Mark's skill set at doing a sequential comic is as high as it gets. And mind you,
Yeah.
I'm
I mean,
really close with Brian Stelfreeze and like really great artists. I'm telling you, I literally watched Mark lay out 4 pages at midnight after a session of like Halo and Domino's Pizza. And the storytelling, when I tell you it wasn't just good, I mean the design of it was great. The use of silhouettes was crazy. The shapes that he threw down,
hmm,
but it all told the story. To get all of that stuff working at the same time takes most people like days of laying stuff out to have all of those
yeah.
layers. And he literally threw it down, and was like, okay, you guys can finish these pages now. You know what I mean? And it was like Mark can literally, as a storyteller, go through an entire issue and give you a perfectly told comic book. Like, super duper quick. His brain just sees shit like that. But what he's in love with is designing. That's how he builds stuff from the bottom to the top. And honestly, I think if anybody could like track down Mark's work and think about it with the perspective that I've just spoken about and find as much pencil and black and white stuff as you can, and don't look at it as a drawing. Think of it as lines placed and arranged in an order and in a design, and really study him according to that. It'll be one of the greatest art lessons you can possibly have.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for them to do an artist edition of something of his,
Yeah,
because like that's like one of like the 2 or 3 artist edition things I would actually like. Okay, I need to get this thing because everything you're saying is everything. I'm like, yeah, obviously I it makes complete sense to me just because he again, he was my guy. He was all,
yeah,
I'm always excited to see his work even to this day. I'm excited
yeah.
to see when he does stuff. And whether I'm not naive to the fact that back in the day they're busy and you have your stable of guys, and your stable of guys learn by finishing your stuff off. Like that's just, it's natural, it's fine, but there's still the spirit and the essence of it there. And hearing how you're talking about how he lays things out, like that's the spirit of your comic, right? Is your layouts. Talk to any artist. We're always trying to match the vibe of our layouts with their
Yeah,
inks. And sometimes we get it and it's great, and sometimes we don't, and we're like, man, it was so much better in the layouts when it was like 4 scribbles on but you knew what it was. You knew the energy of it, and it's just something with
hmm
the that. And it sounds like the sculpting technique and stuff like that kind of increases your success rate with that.
it very much does. It literally does, and it's
Yeah,
because basically you work outside in and in negative shapes. You're so much
yeah.
more so okay, and I'm not saying Mark has this weakness, but his process does not necessarily account for perspective, figure drawing, and anatomy, right?
Hmm.
He knows these things, but it's not necessarily a part of his process. So, and he doesn't know them the way someone who's like a true technician knows those things. So, if you're a true technician and you do a layout and you say, okay, this person is, let's just say, loading a gun, or no, let's say it's two people. He's tossing a gun clip to another person, right?
Hmm.
That gesture that you first come up with now has to be pulled back into human anatomy, right? It has to be pulled back into perspective. It has to be pulled back into proportion. And the thing is, when you lay it out, your layout brain is kind of separate from your technical brain. This is like 90% of the comic book industry, right? Their layout brain
Yeah.
and their construction brain are in two different places. But
Hmm.
Mark, his process puts his layout brain and his technical brain in the same relative place. And that's why. So even though he'll have that gesture going in the layout, it won't be as far because he'll refine the parts of it that artists never refine until the end. He refines it
Hmm.
in the beginning, right? So most artists will check their negative space after the drawing's done, after it's correct. He
Yeah.
checks it on the way to the idea. So if you have so even if something's off, quote unquote, it's off within the emotional, okay, you're expressing yourself spectrum. It's not off
Hmm.
in the dude, you got to redraw that leg spectrum. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that that makes total sense. With his work, especially with his silhouette stuff, because I always thought he had like the best silhouettes.
Yeah.
You know, and so yeah, it's really awesome getting to. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about all this kind of stuff last time we spoke, but I'm like, this first time talking to Nelson, I don't want to, tell me about your old boss, um, but no, I'm really, really appreciating the insight of it, the 10, 12-year-old inside of me is just like, fuck
Yeah.
yeah, Marc Silvestri. Um, but yeah, that's really awesome to hear. We've been chatting for a good bit, and I don't want to like go any further without mentioning, Locked in the Vacancies EP. You
Yes,
guys have a video coming out.
we do.
Uh, I'm not sure the exact drop date of the video, but this
Neither am I. Let me check Instagram, see if we
um,
posted anything.
I, I'm gonna try to get this out early next week. If not, definitely by next Friday, by Friday. So
It
either
should be
the
out by then.
8th. But if you haven't, if the video is out, there will be a link in the show notes, of course. And if it isn't out, and I know the date, I'll make sure I have that listed. But you guys, you came back, you recorded an EP, and as any longtime listeners of the show know, if someone's plays guitar, has anything to do with music or whatever, I got to ask you, what kind of gear are you working with here?
Yes. Okay. So my primary guitar is the KM2 Schecter, the Keith Marrow 2 seven
Okay,
string Schecter, the seven
yeah,
string. So when I started using the seven string permanently, I was still a six string player, right? And
mm-hmm,
it wasn't until I learned more music theory that I got better at the seven string, like from learning like how to use it and how it applies. But what happened
yeah,
was I was actually using a
okay,
Chapman Pro, ML1 Pro, I believe,
okay,
and I have bare knuckle juggernauts in there.
oh, nice,
And it sounds great. Play is great. To this day, it's one of my favorite playing guitars ever in terms of like just the way it feels. It's lightning fast, but doesn't feel too thin. Just awesome guitar. Strat bass shape. And side note, I moved over to Strat shapes from PRS Gibson style shapes because during the
mm-hmm,
pandemic, I was always playing sitting down. And I noticed that my back started hurting. And I realized that the round butt of the guitar makes you turn
mm-hmm.
at like this off angle when you're
Oh,
practicing.
okay.
And when you're practicing for a long time, you get up and you're like, I just aged 5 years. That's not great. So, and then I noticed with my Strat shaped guitars that didn't happen, and I switched over to Strat shapes from there. And I basically haven't looked back at those shapes just because Strats are better for you sitting down. And it's funny because then I like reverse engineered it and looked at all of like the PRS demo videos and like the Gibson demo videos, and I saw that people
Yeah.
were turned to the side. I was like, hey, nobody ever mentions that. And it's funny. I think Pete from Pete Honori from from the Andertons, he mentioned it
Yeah,
one
yeah,
time about being off to the side. I was like, oh, now you say it. Like after I fell in love with
yeah.
PRS, now you say, man, bring it up. But anyway, so I was in the practice space once, and I think I just brought the Keith Marrow just like to switch it up, and
Mm-hmm.
I played a clean chord, and the whole room like vibrated with this warmth. And I was like, I cannot believe there's Fishmans inside it. Um,
Yeah.
I can't believe these active Fishmans sound this much better than every guitar I've heard come in here, mine or otherwise. And from then on, it
Mm-hmm.
was the Keith Marrow. So then I wrote Burden of Being, which we in the band call Bob. Um, I wrote Burden of Being, which is a seven string song written partially in drop G and partially in C minor. The two keys are very close, so you can get away with it. And so I've been using the seven string ever since because I have to, because I can't play Burden
Mm-hmm.
of Being on a six string. You
Yeah.
need the seven string to play it. So amp wise, we tried everything, dude. We literally, so Len Carmichael, our producer, our engineer, he says don't call him a producer, otherwise he'll have to charge us more. So our engineer, Len Carmichael, um, who recorded our EP, he um, he has this awesome custom purple Soldano that sounds
Oh,
great.
okay.
He has, I think it's called a Bogner amp that we tried.
Mm-hmm.
We tried everything. So the way we recorded was we recorded DI straight into the computer, but
Yeah,
then
and it's reamped.
then he reamps.
Okay.
So we tried blending amps, and at the end of the day, good old 5150 was the sound we went with. The
You know,
5150, good.
yeah,
What are you gonna say?
yeah, I mentioned I listened to the album again, the EP earlier today, to refamiliarize myself, and I'm listening, and I'm trying to, I'm terrible at picking out like amp tones and stuff like that because I don't
Yeah,
own amps. I have amp sims,
Yeah.
So I literally have like 4 or 5 different 5150 amp sims, and
Right.
I don't care what anybody says, they all sound different.
Yeah.
Um, but to me, they all sound good, you
They all
know?
sound good. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm listening and I'm like, I would swear this is a 5150.
Yeah.
I would swear on it. But I'm like, I don't know, man. So so I was waiting for you to say what it was, and I was waiting for you to say it's the Soldano or something like that, because
Right.
Soldanos are great. But I'm like, oh man, if he's gonna tell me it's a Soldano, I'm gonna be so wrong. But so okay,
So I'll
I'm
tell
glad
you
I
the
sussed
trick.
that one out.
So if you've heard the album, you know that there's a couple of different kinds of metal sounds that we go through when you talk about the
Yeah,
metal
yeah.
sounding stuff. So we have stuff with a lot of speed picking, but we also have
Hmm.
some stuff with big chords. We have some stuff with some chunkier, like mid tempo, a little bit sludgier chords. And then we have stuff that's a little more in the death metal realm, right?
Hmm.
The 5150 is the one amp that does all of those things really
Hmm.
well, particularly the tightness of something like Church and State, where it's got,
Yeah,
that stuff's got to be really, those sounds got to
yeah.
really be tight. But then something like, what do you call it, Brandolini's Law, where the chords are a little more full, it can do
Hmm.
that. And all you got to do if you want to change the sound is just switch guitars. So
Yeah.
so for Brandolini's Law, I actually used the same ESP that Doc Coyle used to use, with the same
Okay.
model, not the same literal guitar. Len has a
Oh,
version of that, and my God, did I love this guitar! And it had EMGs in it. I thought I was done with EMGs. I thought I was sick
yeah.
of the EMG sound, but this particular guitar, if Len sold it, I'd freaking buy it. And he actually, so I was like
Nice.
riffing on it because we had to tune it to drop C, so that it could be
Okay.
recordable. It hadn't been in drop C, so I had to play it for a little bit to get it to wake up.
Yeah.
And he was watching me riff, and Len's never heard me play before, right? Like not in person
Yeah.
or anything. And he's like, "Dude, you sound like Doc, man. Like I haven't seen anybody like plays like Doc. You play like Doc." And it's funny because I
Nice.
through that guitar, I never thought of my playing as being that close to Doc's, but through that
Hmm.
guitar, I definitely sounded like Doc. I could see our similarities more through that guitar. So
Yeah.
I believe I recorded Brandolini with that
Hmm.
guitar because it's more Gibson style, and that gave that kind of different sound. I recorded
Yeah.
everything else with the KM2,
Hmm.
and my other guitar player at the time, John. Mike's in the band now, but John recorded on his Epiphone actually, but
Okay.
he recorded the second guitar parts for Church and State, and he recorded the second guitar parts for Burden of Being, as well as the solo. Well, yeah, the solo for Burden of Being. I recorded Brandolini entirely myself.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was
Well,
what we used.
that makes me happy to say that the back half of Brandolini's Law is my favorite part of the EP.
Thank you.
Like, because I like the beginning, of course, but like that back half, like you really like the riffing and everything,
Yeah,
the whole vibe of it at the end of it. I'm like, this is my shit right here. This is
awesome,
just like
man. I'm glad you dig
just
that.
like the middle sections and kind of end of Church and State were my thing. Again, I like the whole thing.
Yeah,
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm sitting through here waiting for the other parts to show
yeah, I
to show
appreciate
up.
it,
Like when's the chugging gonna start? But no.
man.
But and it hit me this afternoon or this evening when I was listening to it. Funnily enough, while I'm doing dishes, and I'm just like,
Yeah,
and it just starts up. I'm like, I really, I had to like, I let it finish, and then I went back and and played it again, and I'm like, damn, like this is just like just easily my favorite part of the whole EP, and so I'm happy to hear that it's all you.
oh, thanks, man. I
It's all.
appreciate that. Yeah,
Uh,
that song was a total team effort too, because the bulk of that song, maybe 65% of that song, was written by Brian Lazarus, our former guitar player. And I really wanted to use something that he wrote because he was in the
mm,
band from all of 2007 up to basically 2020. I left the
okay.
band in 2001, right? My last
Yeah.
show was either CBGB's with Poison the Well and Mastodon and Lamb of God, or it was Hellfest with Kill Switch and Unearth and Between the Buried and Me and
Mm,
those guys. That was my last show. One of those was my last shows. So what happened was we broke up initially because Diami had throat nodules, right?
okay.
And so he had to stop because he had
Yeah.
sicknesses and stuff, right? Like that he had to deal with. He could literally medically couldn't sing anymore. That was why we initially broke up. And then we did a reunion thing um, in 2012 with our drummer Rick, but then he died in a car accident. So and it's funny because you talked about metal sites. I see like all of these links on Lambgoat, like covering
Yeah.
the band's history. I didn't even know that stuff existed. I'm like, I'm in a band that like there's stories on Lambgoat. That's so weird. But
Yeah. There's there's pages of articles.
so, and not to
Yeah.
get too scattered, but there's a point to this. So when I joined the band in 1999, I believe it was, 98 or 99, my thing was I want to write a bunch of songs. I love writing songs. And we wrote our first full length album. We did a collaboration record. I wrote two of the songs that were on the next thing and blah, blah, blah. And then Hector and Izzy, who had replaced me, they wrote the next album. It's Always Darkest, right? And then from 2007 until this EP, no songs were written. You know what I mean? 17
Yeah.
years, I guess. No new Locked in a Vacancy song. And I was just baffled. I was like, Laz has been in this band playing other people's songs all this time. Dude, we got to get you. We have to represent you in the band
Yeah. Yeah.
at least one. And that was before I knew he was leaving. But I was like, I thought he was going to write the whole thing. But then Laz left the band. But I'm glad we have a song that he primarily wrote. That having been said, we locked in a vacancy up. So the version that you would
Mhm.
hear some of the same riffs, but it's a very different song construction, and there's no second guitar
Mhm.
parts. And so I would say
Yeah.
about 35 to 40% of the song, the rest of the band came in, and even with Len, we tightened up the end of that song. So everything you're talking about, like with the end and all of that stuff,
Yeah.
that was huge team effort to pull that all together. And I'm definitely happy with the result. It's my favorite version of the song. I always joke with Laz, I hope he didn't butcher it too bad for you.
Well, it's also a great way to end the EP.
Yeah.
Because there's a podcast I talk about sometimes called Thrash It Out,
Mhm.
hosted by comic writer and author Anthony Johnson and
Oh, yeah,
another
I know
writer,
Anthony. Yeah.
Ryan Latendry. And the whole premise of their show is like they'll each take turns picking an album, a metal album, and they both have huge varied tastes. So they've covered everything from Saint Anger to Rat to Death to, I think they, you know, um, just a whole wide range of stuff.
Hmm.
And the thing they mention is a great closing track makes you want to hit play all over again
Yeah.
on and that's what the end of Brandolini's Law does. It makes me want to
Thanks,
go, all
man.
right, let's do it again.
Appreciate that.
And so I think the team effort was well worth it. It certainly certainly I think hit the mark for what you guys were going for.
Thanks so much, dude. That
um,
that, that makes me really happy to hear that.
no, yeah, I'm 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 always happy to tell people I love the thing they did. So, because what, because I know hearing it can help when you're not loving what you're doing,
Yeah.
and you can kind of think like, well, you know what? There's that one time someone told me they liked something I did, and that just gets you through it. But also, I just that's what this podcast is about. I want to share things I'm enjoying. I want people to share things they're enjoying, and
Yeah.
and all that. And I'm very fortunate to know a lot of really talented people who make really cool stuff. So,
Hmm. Yeah,
um,
that it
so
was
before.
interesting.
Yeah.
That.
No, I was gonna say before we started, I was waiting for you to get on. I was messing around on my new solar guitar, and you told me you
Yeah,
had something
I
solar
did.
related to talk about.
So
So if you
a
want if you want
very
to say what you were saying, going to say first, yeah, go ahead, and then we'll
well,
go to
yeah. This is
solar
the
talk.
solar thing's easy. Very long story short, one of the guitars that we tried out while we were recording, Len had a nice solar guitar on the rack.
Hmm.
And we didn't use it, I think, because honestly, it lives in the same place that the Keith Marrow lives in. So it didn't
Yeah,
provide anything new or different, really. But
yeah,
my God, could I not stop playing that guitar, dude? I literally like Len was even looking at me like, you really like that guitar. I can tell by the way you're playing. That's like my theory about guitar demos is you can always tell when somebody really likes a guitar because they play
Mm-hmm.
way better. They start
Yeah.
experimenting with the guitar to see what it can do. And
Mm-hmm.
when they don't like a guitar, they just play the same stuff they always play. And
Yeah.
so he
Yeah.
could tell that I really like that solo. That's my only actual experience with a solar guitar. Although when his
Nice.
band came to play, I think they all had solar guitars. We played with
Oh, okay.
Len's band at a recent show at shoot, was it at St. Vitus? I think it was at St. Vitus. We played a show at St. Vitus with Len's band, and they all had solar guitars and it sounded great. His band's quite good, so that was a lot of fun too. But
Nice.
yeah, I was just gonna say, long story short, with the EP, I'm really happy with it. Not because I think it's perfect or anything, but it was. I just came in it completely differently because when I started Locked in a Vacancy, I knew nothing about guitar. I knew nothing about being in a band.
Mm-hmm.
I was just in, my early 20s, late teens, early 20s, actually. I wasn't even 20 years old when I joined the band. And I was just doing my best. We were all just doing our best. Like that's like the only thing we had was trying hard. We had nothing else. But now, having been to a place like Top Cow and worked at certain, studios and worked with certain people and having certain friends and being on the other side, keep in mind when I was in that band, I wanted to be a comic book artist first and foremost. I didn't even think I'd be in a band. I thought I was just going to be
Mm-hmm.
terrible at guitar. I never thought I'd be
Mm-hmm.
good enough to play in front of people, right?
Yeah.
So my goal was to be a comic book artist. So I'm in the band with this like monkey on my back of like I still have to. What if I never make it like as a comic book artist? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was never afraid of that because I knew I'd rather die than like fail at being a comic book artist. But it was still something I had to do, right? And so every
Mm-hmm.
mistake, and this for a lot of young artists might deal with this, you're worried that they might not let you in. So every
Mm-hmm.
shortcoming you have, it's hard for you to accept it, which is what you should do. But it's hard for you to accept it because it literally threatens you, right? Now, none of my artistic flaws threaten me. I have the option to improve. Like you were talking about with Marc Silvestri, he had the option to fall in love with design because he's already a successful artist, right? He's already a
Yeah.
professional. And not even like Mark's success. Like he didn't even have to be that successful. You could take somebody less than, a quarter successful as Mark. If they're a pro and they're getting work, they don't really have to change. But when you haven't been hired yet, you have to change. And so trying to be in a band with that energy, it's good in a way because you're trying really hard, but you also have no idea what you're doing. Coming back into the band around 20, well, really the pandemic is when I came in, like post pandemic. Coming back to the band post pandemic, I'm looking at it from a strategic standpoint, knowing that if we do the right things, we'll create a product that we're happy with. And if we create a product that we're happy with and share it with people, that'll be good enough. Like I don't care how much money we make or, whether it's on this
Yeah.
list or that list. Like you hope it turns out well, but that's all you can do. Is you do a good job, don't be a jerk, play a bunch of shows and see what happens. So the first mission though was basically I've never written a song in this band that I'm happy with. I just want to write and record an EP that we're all proud of. And I really felt like we knocked that out of the park as a group. And so, in that sense, I'm really happy with it. Yet at the same time, I have so much higher ambitions for the full length album. Like in terms of what I want to do, it's not even close.
Nice.
I won't get into that because I don't want to let that
Yeah.
energy out. But definitely, I think with this group, we have a shot at writing, a really cool album, and I hope we can stick the landing on it.
Well, that energy, that vibe is, I think, is really prevalent in the EP. It feels like a band that's kind of like making kind of almost like a mission statement, almost
Yeah.
of like, like we're here now. This is who we are now. Fucking get ready,
That's
and
literally, dude, that's literally it, right? I'm like, guys, it's been damn near, I mean, for me, it's been over 20 years since I was in a band.
yeah.
I don't want to keep playing songs that represent me before I was finished puberty. Like,
Hmm.
I want to play stuff that represents me now. And quite frankly, I've learned a lot about creation since then because I don't
Hmm.
look at art and music as separate. For me, they
Hmm.
work very similarly. And I learned art better from playing guitar. And there are some things about guitar that I understand easier because I understand art. So I'm like, we're all, and the cool thing about like the guys is everybody's chill. There's nobody in the band that's like crazy or really tough to deal with. They're all grown
Yeah.
ups who are fairly laid back people and like good guys. I'm like, and smart guys. So I'm like,
Yeah.
let's write something that represents this group because, rest in peace to Rick, but he's not here. Hector's in his band, which is a solid band, actually. You might like their band a lot. Um, Burn the Skies is the name of Hector's band. Hector
Okay.
Rodriguez, founder of Locked in a Vacancy, co-founder with Diami. Diami was there super duper early as well. Um, but after that, I'm the next closest thing to an original member, and I'm technically the third guitar player of Locked in a Vacancy in this slot. Technically, really, I'm the second. I am on the first album, but John is the first.
Hmm.
John Semity, who's currently a salsa teacher, is the first guy to record. And I'm like, let's represent the group that's here and make
Yeah.
something that is this locked in a vacancy. Let's not try to reach back into the past and, follow old rules and patterns that we had before. And I think everybody did a really good job of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear you're at least just having a great time and
Oh
you're
yeah.
really pumped for the LP. I'm excited to hear it. I'm sure. Do you guys know when you're going to be sitting down to actually do that, or is that still kind of up in the air? You can't really talk about it yet.
I would say can't really talk about it yet. What I can say is that we are actively writing. And both me
Okay.
and Mike, as the guitar players who kind of start most of the writing, as well as Jamin, the drummer, who Jamin is very involved in songwriting structure as well. But we do bring the riffs to Jamin. That's the general
Okay.
process. Is me or Mike or me and Mike will bring the riffs to Jamin, and then we will grow it from there. Um, but we're all very excited to write stuff and are already writing stuff. And definitely one of the songs we'll see if it gets finished, if we can stick the landing on it. But it definitely has my favorite riff in it, like that I've ever written.
Nice. 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 Awesome, awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the progress on that. Hopefully, you guys will post sneak peeks of the studio stuff. I always love seeing
Yeah.
stuff like that and all that. And obviously, at any point, you guys are ready. Like, I'd love to have you and maybe some of the other guys come on, and we
Awesome.
can all chat about it and stuff like that. I don't want to keep you any longer. Again, I know it's even later over there than it is here. Um, Usually I start the show by asking Comics Coffee Metal, what are you digging right now? We kind of blew right past that. So if you wouldn't mind, just so I can keep consistent with having asked that question, can we speed run it? Would you
Yes.
go? So
Okay. So in comics, believe it or not, I have just recently, for the first time ever, read through American Vampire,
oh, okay.
and I'm a massive fan of that book. I really
Yeah.
love Scott Snyder's writing on that, and that book has definitely motivated me to want to do my own personal creator-owned work
Ooh,
because
nice. Glad to hear that.
even from when I was a little kid, look, I've always loved Marvel, and DC and stuff like that, but creator owned work has always been a special thing for me. Whether it's American stuff or manga, I've always loved creator owned work. And that's really where my heart has always been. Not that I'll never be a guy that says I'm done doing Marvel or DC and stuff. That stuff's fun, and I look
Hmm.
forward to the next Marvel or DC thing I do. Um, but I have to do creator owned work. And reading American Vampire really inspired me to get back on that. So I think I read 6 or 7 volumes of it, like straight through.
Oh, nice.
So that's what I'm digging for comics. Coffee, it's still Javalia,
Mm-hmm.
my favorite brand of coffee. I also use Death Wish coffee. That's my other
Okay.
one. So Javalia and Death Wish is all we will have in this house. We don't tolerate anything else. We will
Well,
literally walk.
now it makes sense where you're like, it's too late for coffee for me. Yeah, if you're drinking Death Wish,
Yeah, that
yeah.
stuff works, man. That stuff hits home.
Uh,
So
uh,
the one place I'll never go cheap on is coffee. If I can't
yeah.
afford Death Wish and Javalia when it's not on sale, I just need to work more. All right, that's just motivation to get myself in order because that I need to
Nice,
have my
nice.
favorite brands of coffee. And metal. Oh man, so the new Suffocation is really really good.
Okay.
Really fantastic. If you're not, I mean, they're pretty on the death metal ish side, but definitely
Yeah.
highly recommend them. Um, we're gonna play with this band called Cypher, and their new album is awesome, really really cool. And actually, just so that I'm accurate, let me open up Spotify. So my, I don't know if this was on my radar at the time we spoke last, but the most recent Protest the Hero album, was it Palimpsest? That is my favorite metal album right now overall.
Okay.
Love that album to death. And
Nice.
I'm trying to think because I know there's one more. I'm pulling up my Spotify now that I wanted to get. Oh my God, yeah, I'm sorry, Palimpsest. Palimpsest. I don't even know what that word means, but great band. So there's this band that's extremely similar to the Black Dahlia murder. I think they're
Hmm.
called Neurosynthetic or Deathless is the name of the band.
Okay.
So listen, if it turns you off that they sound like Black Dahlia murder, then don't bother. But if you like Black Dahlia murder and you wish there was more stuff like that, run, don't walk. I actually heard them on
It,
Trey Xavier's channel, and I
oh,
think it
okay.
might be their most recent song. Outstanding, really, really
Yeah.
great. I couldn't believe it was like that, knocking it out of the park with that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, that's mostly what I've been on recently in terms of metal.
Awesome. Awesome. If you don't mind, I would like to toss some recommendations your way to maybe
Please,
check out. You may have already checked these bands out. First and foremost, in terms of death metal, I suggest checking out Crypta.
I don't know them. How do you spell that?
Crypta. It's an all female Brazilian death metal
Okay.
band, and they are awesome. They are very classic death metal sounding.
Do you have a song in particular you recommend?
Well, their first album is I think is just absolutely solid from start to beginning. Let me see, Echoes of the Soul. I
Okay,
think,
I see that.
yeah, maybe Death Arcana or Shadow Within are probably their best representations of what they do.
Cool. That's in the
Their second
Spotify.
album, yeah, their second album, Shades of Sorrow, is also really good.
Hmm.
They switched one of their guitar players, and the sound definitely gets leans a little more towards the darker
Yeah.
end of things. And then for just for some fucking riffs, man, Silosis,
Oh, I actually just started listening to those guys. In
A
fact,
Sign of Things to Come, man, that is one of my favorite albums of last year.
I had
It is
never heard of
just,
them, and my guys were
I
talking
yeah,
about them, and I put them on. I was like, "Oh,
yeah,
this is fire! Great riffs, like you said, just fantastic. I love good riffs. Love good riffs.
yeah. Just Josh Middleton's just like just fucking just a riff
Absolutely.
monster, man. That it's definitely just been living in my go to albums for a while. Um, and then I always have to recommend my favorite band of the moment, Orbit Culture. Like, I don't know how you are into like the deathcore kind of stuff.
I loved actually. One of my favorite is what do you call it? Um, I know it's funny. You probably know who I'm going to say before I even say it. What is this band? Dean Lamb's band. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, why can't I think of the name? I know Dean
Because
Lamb, but I can't think
I
of the name for some
poisoned
reason.
you with my not remembering the name of Arkspire. Arkspire. That's the name of the
Artspire,
band.
yeah. Okay, okay,
Dude, even my brother, who's not a death metal guy, he likes metal, but he likes more
yeah,
Opeth, Dream Theater stuff.
mhm,
More generally more melodic. He has a little bit of room
yeah.
for Black Dahlia here and there, but that song, Death Corpse Aviator, dude, it is like to me, it fits into that category of like there's a genre called great music where it doesn't matter if you listen to that music or not. That song you'll let in. And I feel like Death Corpse Aviator is in that place. You put that on and people go, okay, I get that. I don't
Yeah.
get deathcore, but I get that. it, it is
Uh,
so much.
yeah,
It is so much and so over the top, but I
yeah.
absolutely love it.
I don't know. I don't know if people really consider Orbit Culture deathcore anymore,
Hmm.
but they're definitely very heavy, very melodic. My my best, I think the best representation of what they sound like to me is Gojira and Metallica's "Very Angry Teenage Kid."
Okay. Okay. Oh
You
man,
know,
speaking of
and
which, not to swing it back to us, but dude, oh, I think Tattoo Inc. was, I mean, Tattoo.com. They reviewed our EP and they called us
yeah,
metalcore on steroids. And that is literally the best compliment of any kind I've received ever in my life.
nice, nice,
I,
nice,
I
nice.
absolutely. So, what was
Yeah,
the name of the track you were talking about? Of
Orbit
Orbit
Culture.
Culture?
Well, I would, I'm
Very
gonna
popular.
pull up. So my favorite track off their latest album is called "From the Inside,"
Okay, I see that one here.
and they're very much about mood and vibe too. They're but they also got big, fat, heavy riffs, and they do this thing where they they'll have the kind of like the downward end of the song,
Hmm.
and then they'll come back in with something kind of melodic, maybe a piano, maybe a like guitar or something, and then the breakdown is just the one or two notes that are the heaviest fucking things you ever heard in your life.
Yeah.
um the ending riff to "From the Inside" has probably moved more barbell weight than anything else in my entire life. uh,
Okay.
it's it is, and it's so simple and it is so ridiculous, but it's just like, yes. um but yeah, they straddle that line of where we're also, because Gojira is also one of my probably my number two favorite band of all time.
Hmm.
And Gojira is definitely one of those bands where it's like they're so good because everything they do, they could do stuff that's so much more complicated than what they're doing, but what they always do is service the song and the vibe. And they still do kind of weird things. They still kind of play flat fifths and instead of a regular power chord or something like that. But it all sounds just nasty and gnarly and really good. But yeah, I would check those out. If I remember, I'll try to send you some links to some videos so it's easy to source out for you.
Okay, cool.
Um,
I threw those
yeah,
songs
and
into
then
my Spotify.
yeah, and then I always got to bring up Spirit Boxes because I love Spirit Box. You're just a great vibe.
So one of my best friends, former bass player from Locked in a Vacancy, Spirit
Yeah.
Box is probably in his top five bands ever, and is definitely his favorite new band. So
Mm-hmm.
believe me, I get all the Spirit Box I can take, and I like Spirit Box. But
It's just a good time every time they
yeah,
have a new song like Sleep Token. It's just like
yeah,
it's like just a good, you listen to it, it's just good. It's like,
yeah,
all right, cool.
yeah,
I can dig on this.
yeah,
But yeah, so hopefully one of those bands you'll enjoy. I'm going to check out some of the ones you mentioned for sure, and
yeah.
then
Start with
and
the listen to that entire Protest the Hero album all the way through.
okay,
I know that's a
all right,
tall ask, but it's one of those like concept albums where all of the songs fit well together. And I
okay,
think, and I could give you my favorite song off of that album, but I think it hits better if you listen to the whole album. And then,
okay.
after that, you can play that song on repeat all the time, like I do, if you like it. But
And
yeah,
that's
that
Palimpsest.
Palimpsest, yes.
All right, all right, all right. It's added to my iTunes library.
Awesome. Yeah, that's my favorite album. Man, that's my favorite album in a long, long time.
Oh, it's 53 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, I did really like The Last Animals as Leaders a lot, but Palimpsest
Mhm.
is, I don't know, maybe since I first heard Pliny, that's like my favorite album since then. Like, really, really love that album.
Nice, nice, awesome, awesome. Well, listen, I'm not going to keep you any longer. Let you get some rest. Thank you so much for coming back on. I can't wait till we chat again.
This was a joy,
Right
man. Thank
now,
you for having me.
let everyone know where they can find you and Locked in a Vacancy online.
Yes, so most importantly, Locked in a Vacancy, it's on Instagram. If you search that, you should find them. If you're having trouble, it's just locked underscore in underscore a underscore vacancy. If you find me, I'm Nelson Blake II on Instagram and Nelson Blake the numeral 2 on Twitter. But either way, if you type Nelson Blake the second, Nelson Blake II into um, the Googles, you'll find me pretty easily thanks to Marvel and DC. Because every time they put out a book, I get into the algorithm and I'm stuck there forever, like Neo from the Matrix. So
worst things in the world. Right?
I'm sure.
Uh, yeah.
So
All right,
yeah,
well,
no,
I'll
that's
make sure
pretty
there's
funny.
links to all that stuff in the show notes below so everyone can just easily click and go follow and check everything out. Once again, Nelson, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Don. Always a pleasure, man.